If you could do anything you wanted and never get caught, would you still be a good person? That is the question at the heart of one of the most famous books ever written, not whether you would look good, not whether people would praise you, not whether you could protect your reputation. The real question is simpler and harsher than that. If consequences disappeared, would you still choose justice? Plato turns that question into a story. A shepherd named Gyges finds a ring. At first it seems ordinary. Then he twists it on his finger and realizes no one can see him. He has become invisible, and once he knows that, everything changes. He sneaks into the palace, seduces the queen, murders the king, takes the throne. That story comes from Plato's Republic, and it is one of the sharpest of moral traps ever designed. Because the ring is not really about magic, it is about permission. Take away punishment, take away witnesses, take away the fear of exposure. Who are you then? For Plato's speaker Glaucon, the answer is dark. He thinks most people are only just because they have to be, because they are weak, because they are afraid, because they know they cannot get away with wrongdoing safely enough. Give them the ring, and the costume comes off. That is why this ancient thought experiment still feels so modern. The Ring of Gyges is the anonymous account, the burner phone, the hidden deal, the private betrayal, the lie that leaves no trace. The message you think no one else will ever read. It asks a question that never stops mattering. If nobody was watching, what would you allow yourself to become? And Plato raises the stakes even higher. He does not just ask what justice is. He asks whether being just is actually better than being unjust. Better not for your image, better not for your career. Better for you because if injustice really works, if the ruthless person truly lives better, then morality starts to look like a story told to keep weaker people obedient. That is the challenge of the Republic, and Plato takes it personally because he did not write in a calm, stable world. He wrote after watching his city tear itself apart. Plato was born into one of the most powerful families in Athens, probably around 428 or 427 BCE. He grew up in a city that had once been dazzling. Athens was rich, confident, artistic, democratic, and ambitious. It was one of the great centers of the Greek world. Then it entered a war that broke it. For nearly 30 years, Athens fought Sparta in the Peloponnesian War. It was long, brutal, and humiliating. By the end, Athens had lost its empire, its confidence, and much of its political stability. Then things got worse. After Athens was defeated, Sparta backed a short but vicious oligarchic regime known as the 30 Tyrants. They ruled through fear, confiscation, and murder. And for Plato, this was not abstract politics. Some of the men involved were his own relatives. So one side of Athenian politics had already shown itself capable of brutality. Then democracy came back. And democracy, in Plato's eyes, did something unforgivable. It executed Socrates. Socrates was the man who shaped Plato's life more than anyone else. He wrote nothing. He held no office. He wandered Athens, asking questions that made confident people uncomfortable. What is justice? What is courage? What is piety? What is the good life? He questioned politicians, poets, craftsmen, and anybody else who claimed to know what they were talking about. He made enemies. In 399 BCE, Socrates was tried by the restored Athenian democracy, convicted, and sentenced to death. He drank hemlock and died. That moment hangs over the entire republic. From Plato's perspective, both major political options had failed. Oligarchy had produced terror. Democracy had killed the best man he knew. So the question was no longer just which faction should win. The deeper question was whether any existing political order truly understood justice at all. That is the world behind this book. The Republic is often treated like a book about government, but it is really about something even deeper. It is about what happens when a society loses its grip on truth, on education, on moral formation, and on the difference between what looks good and what actually is good. Even the title is a little misleading. The Greek title, politeia, does not really mean republic in the modern sense. It means something more like the arrangement of a political community, the structure of a city, the way a society is ordered. And that word, ordered, matters. Because Plato is not only asking how a city should be arranged, he is asking how a human being should be arranged. That becomes clear when the dialogue begins. The Republic opens not in a palace or courtroom, but at a house in the Piraeus, the port of Athens. Socrates is there talking with an older wealthy man named Cephalus, and at first the discussion sounds harmless enough. What is justice? Cephalus gives the kind of answer respectable people love. Justice means telling the truth and paying what you owe. Sounds fine. Then, Socrates asks the kind of question that ruins clean definitions. What if you borrowed weapons from a friend, and later he went mad and demanded them back? Would it be just to return them? By Cephalus's definition, yes. But clearly that cannot be right, so that answer falls apart. Then Cephalus' son Polemarchus tries. Justice, he says, means helping your friends and harming your enemies. Again, this sounds solid for about 10 seconds, but Socrates asks who counts as a friend. People are often wrong about who is good and who is bad. And more importantly, can justice really involve harming anyone? If you harm a horse, it becomes a worse horse. If you harm a person, do they become more just or less? Less. So how can justice consist in making people morally worse? That answer dies too, then the discussion explodes. A sophist named Thrasymachus bursts in and says what a lot of people suspect but rarely say out loud. Justice, he argues, is nothing but the advantage of the stronger. The rulers make the rules. The rules protect the rulers. Justice is just the name those in power give to arrangements that keep them on top. It is one of the most modern-sounding claims in the ancient world. Strip away the speeches. Strip away the patriotic language. Strip away the moral theater. Who benefits from the system? The powerful. That, says Thrasymachus, is your real answer. And he goes further. The truly successful person is not the honest one. It is the grand criminal who is smart enough to get away with everything. The tyrant, the manipulator, the ruthless winner. Socrates pushes back, but Book 1 ends without a satisfying victory. He weakens Thrasymachus, but he does not yet prove that justice is worth having. That is where Glaucon and Adeimantus step in, and they make the challenge harder, not easier. Glaucon says there are things we want only for themselves, things we want only for their results, and things we want for both. Most people, he says, treat justice like medicine, necessary, maybe useful, but unpleasant. Something you put up with because the alternative is worse. Then he tells the Ring of Gyges story and throws down the gauntlet. Give the just man a ring that makes him invisible. Give the unjust man the same ring. According to Glaucon, both men will do the same thing. Both will steal. Both will cheat. Both will indulge themselves. Nobody is just willingly. And then he makes the problem even more brutal. Do not compare an average good man with an average bad man. Compare the perfectly unjust man, who is smart enough to look just, with the perfectly just man, who is mistaken for unjust and suffers for it. Which life is really better? That is the knife at the throat of the whole book. And Plato's response is strange, ambitious, and unforgettable. If justice is too hard to see inside one person, Socrates says, maybe it will be easier to see in something larger, a city. So instead of defining justice directly, he builds an imaginary city from scratch. At first the city is simple. Human beings need food, shelter, clothing, tools. No one can do everything alone, so people specialize. One grows food, one builds houses, one makes shoes. A city forms because human beings need one another. But Glaucon thinks this first city sounds too bare, too plain, too healthy. He wants luxury, better food, better furniture, more pleasure, more comfort. And the moment luxury enters, the city swells. It needs more resources, more land, more wealth, more protection, which means more conflict, which means war. So now the city needs guardians. This is where Plato starts becoming truly radical. The guardians cannot just be strong. They have to be brave, disciplined, educated, and incapable of turning their strength against their own people. They must be fierce toward enemies and gentle toward citizens. And because character is formed early, Plato becomes obsessed with education. Stories matter, songs matter, myths matter, culture matters. What children hear when they are young becomes part of their souls. So if stories teach cowardice, dishonesty, or moral chaos, they are dangerous. That is why Plato wants to censor poetry. not because art is trivial, but because it is powerful. To him, culture is not background decoration. It is political engineering. Then comes one of the most controversial ideas in the entire book. The noble lie. Plato suggests telling citizens a founding myth. They will be taught that they were born with different metals mixed into their souls. Gold for rulers, silver for defenders, bronze and iron for producers. It is not literally true. Plato knows that. The point is social stability. He thinks a well-shaped myth might persuade citizens to accept their proper roles and preserve unity. That is one reason the Republic has always made readers uneasy. Plato is willing to use falsehood in the service of order. Then, once the classes are established, he identifies the city's virtues. Wisdom belongs to the rulers. Courage belongs to the guardians. Moderation belongs to the city as a whole when everyone agrees about who should rule. And justice? Justice turns out to be the quiet principle holding everything together. Justice is each part doing its own job and not interfering with the others. That is Plato's famous definition. Justice is not mainly a list of rules. It is proper order, functional harmony. The whole works because the parts are not at war. And then he reveals the twist. The city was never the real subject. The city is a model of the self. Plato thinks each of us is not a simple, unified thing. We are divided inside. Different forces pull in different directions. Part of us wants truth. Part of us wants honor. Part of us wants pleasure, comfort, money, sex, food, and all the rest. So he divides the soul into three parts. Reason is the part that thinks, plans, judges, and asks what is truly good. Spirit is the part that gets angry, seeks respect, and rises up in defense of what feels right. Appetite is the part that craves satisfaction in all its forms. These map directly onto the classes of the city. Reason corresponds to rulers, spirit to soldiers, appetite to producers. And now Plato's definition of justice gets personal. A just city is one where each class does its proper work under wise rule. A just soul is one where reason rules, spirit supports it, and appetite stays in its place. Injustice is not just bad behavior. It is inner disorder. That is one of Plato's greatest ideas. It changes morality from something external into something internal. Justice is not just what you do. It is what condition your soul is in while you do it. That is why Plato often sounds more like a doctor than a lawyer. A healthy body works properly because its parts are coordinated. A sick body falls into imbalance. Plato thinks the same is true of the soul. A person can look successful from the outside and still be inwardly wrecked. That is how he answers the Ring of Gyges. Suppose the unjust man gets everything he wants. Money, influence, pleasure, power. Suppose he wins. Plato says he still loses if he has trained his soul into chaos. Appetite has become king. Reason has become a servant, inventing excuses for desire. Spirit no longer defends truth, it defends ego. The man may look free, but inwardly he is ruled. That, for Plato, is the real punishment of injustice. You cannot escape your own soul. You carry it into every success, every pleasure, every secret victory. And that leads to one of the book's boldest political conclusions. If reason should rule in the individual, what should rule in the city? Plato's answer is simple and shocking. Philosophers. The phrase Philosopher-King can sound absurd today. But Plato has a specific kind of philosopher in mind. Not just a clever talker. Not just someone who likes abstract ideas. A philosopher is someone who loves truth more than appearances. Someone trained to distinguish what seems good from what actually is good. That is why Plato says cities will have no rest from evils until philosophers rule, or rulers truly become philosophers. He doubles down with three famous waves of radical proposals. First, women should be allowed to become guardians and rulers if they have the right nature. For ancient Greece, that is astonishingly bold. Second, the guardian class should not have private families or private wealth. No ordinary dynasties, no inherited privilege, no hoarding. The rulers must not be tempted to govern for their own household instead of the whole city. Third, philosophers must rule. To justify that last claim, Plato introduces his deeper metaphysics. He thinks most people live at the level of opinion. They move through appearances, habits, and public impressions. Philosophers aim higher. They seek what does not change, truth itself, and above all the form of the good. To explain that, Plato gives the analogy of the sun. In the visible world, the sun makes sight possible. Without light, even healthy eyes cannot see. The sun also nourishes life. In the intelligible world, the good plays a similar role. It makes truth knowable and gives order to reality. If you want to judge a life, a law, or a regime properly, you need more than preference. You need a standard. For Plato, the good is that standard. Then he gives another image. The divided line. At the bottom are shadows and reflections. Above that are physical objects. Above that is reasoning, like mathematics. At the top is true understanding, direct grasp of the deepest realities. Most people live low on the line. Philosophers struggle upward, and then Plato turns that struggle into the most famous image in all of philosophy, the cave. Imagine prisoners chained underground since childhood, forced to stare at a wall. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, others carry objects that cast shadows on the wall. Because the prisoners have never seen anything else, they think the shadows are reality. That is Plato's image of ordinary life lived among appearances. Then one prisoner is freed. He turns around. The fire hurts his eyes. He is dragged upward. Daylight blinds him. At first he cannot bear it. Then slowly he sees reflections, then real objects, then the sky, and finally the sun. The ascent is painful because truth often is. Plato's point is not just that people are ignorant, it is that we grow attached to our illusions. The cave is not merely a lack of information, it is a whole world built from habit, social agreement, and imitation. The prisoner who escapes eventually understands that the shadows were not the deepest reality at all. They were copies, surfaces, appearances, and then he goes back down. That is crucial. He returns because knowledge creates responsibility. But when he comes back, the others mock him. His eyes no longer adjust quickly in the dark. He looks foolish, and if he tries to free them, Plato says, they would kill him if they could. The shadow of Socrates is all over that passage. A man turns away from convention, pursues truth, returns to his city, challenges its illusions, and is destroyed for it. That is one reason the cave still hits so hard. It feels timeless. The cave can be propaganda. It can be celebrity culture. It can be partisan media. It can be the endless feed of images and opinions that turns appearance into reality. Plato did not know about smartphones, but he knew that human beings can live among shadows and defend them passionately. For him, education is not stuffing facts into a passive mind. It is turning the soul around. But Plato does not believe most real cities succeed at that. In fact, he thinks most cities decay. That is where the Republic gets cold. Plato describes a sequence of political decline. First comes aristocracy, rule by the best. Then timocracy, where honor starts to matter more than wisdom. Then oligarchy, where wealth takes control. Then democracy, where freedom becomes the supreme value. Then tyranny, where freedom collapses into domination. His critique of democracy is one of the most controversial parts of the book. At first, he admits, democracy looks attractive. It is diverse, colorful, full of choices. People live as they please. So what is the problem? For Plato, the problem begins when freedom loses all hierarchy, when every desire is treated as equally valid, when discipline starts to look oppressive, when expertise looks suspicious, when no shared standard remains for deciding which desires should rule and which should be restrained. At the level of the soul, that produces a person scattered across impulses. At the level of the city, it produces instability. And out of that instability, Plato thinks, a demagogue can rise. Someone who presents himself as the defender of the people, the protector of freedom, the fixer of chaos. Then the protector becomes the master. That is Plato's darkest political insight. A society drunk on unlimited freedom may eventually hand itself to a tyrant because chaos becomes unbearable. And tyranny for Plato is not true freedom. It is slavery to the worst parts of the soul. The tyrant looks powerful, but inwardly he is ruled by appetite, fear, paranoia, and craving. He trusts no one. He is trapped by his own desires. He must lie, flatter, punish, and dominate constantly just to survive. The man who looks most free is,